Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Twitch
Look
and
like
Facebook are both there.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh, I see
and there we
it's
go.
live on YouTube now.
We are live.
Okay. I guess I am live just talking like an idiot to myself. If you're in this, can you hear me or are we still hooped? Are we going to be recording offline? Oh, third could hear us. Can hear me.
We are back,
So,
baby.
we are back. We are back. Able to go. Fixed it up. Let's have a little moment to reset and let me have a little moment to just reset myself here. Give myself a little countdown. Three, two, one. Welcome back to the land of the technical difficulties, the landing strip presented by From Financial. And it's been a couple of weeks since we've gotten to talk about this team. Obviously, the Four Nations came by. We apologize for last night not being live right after the game. Unfortunately, we've been going through it this weekend. Got a joke on Twitter over saying, "Never mind, we'll try again." Sponsored by American Airlines, and some of those companies might be good for our technical difficulty situation with what we're seeing lately. But enough of hearing about that. Let's dive into some puck, and without my boy Mikey, it's going to be hard for me to talk puck. So, Mikey, how you doing tonight?
After all of that, doing pretty good. Like the like the Jets yesterday, it was a rough start to this one for us. You know, we had to shake out the rust as well. But like the Jets yesterday, man, we're coming away with a W. We got the show going. Missed you guys. I missed doing this. So yeah, I'm just real excited.
Yeah, and how can you not be excited? Let's start with the Winnipeg Jets. Um, Coming out of the break, they went into the break with a franchise tying 8 game win streak and go into St. Louis and give themselves a franchise record 9 straight. What was your big takeaways from last night's game with St. Louis versus the Winnipeg Jets?
You could really tell that there was a break that went on. It was, it was rough throughout parts of the game. You could see little spurts of where they cycled the puck well, and you saw that Winnipeg Jets team that we got accustomed to watching win 8 straight. But overall, it was a game of people really trying to find their feet. You could really see it. So happy to get the win. Not so happy about maybe a couple of in-game management type things that we can talk about as we go on, but getting that ninth win is huge. 9 in a row, even with the break in between, still counts. That still counts for the franchise record. So, in a year of firsts and a year of setting history for the Jets, it was good to see them add another one to the to the trophy case.
I mean, some of the just winning numbers behind the Jets right now are pretty staggering. I mean, last night was game 57 and it was what their 40th win of the season. I did not have that on my bingo card coming into this year. And yeah, it was definitely, and I think that should have been expected, a sloppier game coming out of the break. When you have 2 weeks off like that, this sport is just so hard to come back and be at the top of your game. We saw some big numbers all weekend throughout the league of just some staggering goal totals. I know I was sprinkling a lot of money on overs yesterday after I saw the afternoon slate.
Yep.
So it's hard for me to nitpick too much on that kind of stuff because that kind of stuff was expected. I didn't think this was the A grade from the game from the Winnipeg Jets by any means, but this was another example of them on a night where they're not their best, on a night where, like Turd just put it, everything looked out of sync, but nice to have the streak extended. Um, they find a way to battle back late in this one. They brought it right down the wire. And as I've said multiple times, I'm not someone that really buys into the good teams finding things, ways to win narrative. This would fall under that narrative, but given the surrounding environment we're talking about going into that game, for me, I just thought it showed again a level of heart that and a level of give a fuck maybe that we haven't seen from this core in years past when they've kind of faltered in situations. For them to keep winning and put up 9 straight, and you heard Gabe Velarde with Sean Reynolds after the game. We just want to win every game. Like that's the mentality in that locker room, and it really does show with the consistency and how many of these big streaks they've been able to put together, now putting their names on a franchise record, it's hard not to get excited about that kind of stuff right now.
Yeah, it was the quintessential, 2024, 2025 Winnipeg Jets game. There's moments where you're scratching your head going, what are you doing? There's moments where you go, wow, look at the move the puck. And they're never out of it, even when they, are down, even when there's 27 seconds left. Somehow this group finds a way to get those 2 points. We got to see our first shootout of the year. It took until this point in the year to see their very first shootout. So that's a little I like to see that they're winning games in regulation and in overtime. It kind of speaks more in my head. This isn't scientific or anything, just how I feel. It speaks more to me that that's a team that's going to find ways to win in the playoffs as well. You can have a team that gets a crap load of extra wins, in the shootout in a year and gets into the playoffs, but that team definitely scares me less than a team like the Jets that are, pretty battle tested when it comes to getting those 2 points early on. So, yeah, it was not the best game, but a good result.
I'll push back on your gut feeling a little bit
Hit me.
with I don't look at it the same way when it comes to especially overtime, because we know once you get to the playoffs, it's no longer 3-on-3, it's 5-on-5 until the next team scores. And it was interesting. This team has been really good in 3-on-3. That was our first shootout of the year, but if I'm not mistaken, it's been since like October of 2023 since this team has even gone to one. And you know what? I'm going to spotlight Eric Comrie, as in Ehlers We Trust talks about coming through in overtime. I thought he was in a game that was as sloppy as we're kind of talking about, and you're not expecting everything to be in sync coming out of a lengthy break. I thought Eric Comrie stood tall on some really quality opportunities. And honestly, all three of the goals, I'm looking at two different players as far as like assorting blame towards them.
Yeah, 100%. It's Comrie has been extremely good the second half or 2/3 of the season. He's given them a chance in every game. Now it hasn't produced a lot of wins on the board, but I think we've talked about how that can be much more chalked up to the fact that they gave him no goal support in any of those previous games. So yeah, Comrie was once again doing, he's playing well above what he's making in terms of his salary. He's providing the type of backup that the Jets need at this point. Everybody knows this is Connor Hellebuck's team. It's Connor Hellebuck's net. But he needs days off. He needs time to catch his breath and recover, and especially after the Four Nations. So yeah, Comrie he's done everything you've asked of him, on the ice. And like, I absolutely adore Eric Comrie off the ice. Every interview he does, he recently just had some comments about how frustrating it is that hockey can be such an expensive sport for parents to get their kids into, and how that's really hurting the game overall, because you're putting up this barricade to getting some some athletes that would go to other sports now because of those financial things. So yeah, Eric Comrie is just, yeah, I love the guy. I think he's great, and he's given us everything that you want out of a backup. And I'll be honest, I was kind of down on Comrie coming back again as the backup initially. So I'm happy to eat crow about it. It's been a nice surprise.
Yeah, honestly, I was pretty impressed with the introspection from Eric Comrie, not just because like he's an NHL player and whatnot. I mean, hearing those comments from arguably the wealthiest player on the Winnipeg Jets was like quite eye-opening, and I think that's a good quality that he has, and he's got good grounded roots in understanding that kind of thing. He's been nothing but solid. He's been perfectly fine as a backup, especially on League Min. And then you just look at some like and this was huge, and you could see why it's huge. And the Jets, I think, have done a really good job highlighting this year than maybe in years past when he was around.
Yep.
It is so clear that Eric Comrie, like when you talk about having good guys in the room and having different personalities in the room, and someone that just brings the vibes in the room, that's Eric Comrie. And you're
Yep.
getting that out of your backup spot. He's someone that doesn't seem to have a bad day around the rink. He's clearly Connor Hellebuck's biggest fan and supporter, which you want to have that symbiotic relationship with goaltenders. And I saw a tweet today saying that it's kind of funny that he was born to be a YouTuber and he became an NHL goaltender. They've done a really good job of highlighting Eric Comrie's like personality, and you could see why he would be so beloved in an NHL dressing room, even during the times when his career wasn't looking so well. And I'll go on to say this, and I think it's pretty well known at this point when you look back. David Rittich comes in, has a quality year despite being on the brinks of his NHL career. Laurent Brossoit, same conversation, and now Eric Comrie. The work that Wade Flaherty has done to continually get the most out of backups behind Connor Hellebuck, especially now when you're spending that $8.5 million at the position, and we're likely not going to see another $2 million investment like we saw with Brossoit. I don't think that should go unnoticed either when you're talking about the organization and just what Wade Flaherty's been able to do around the circumstances, not only working with Connor Hellebuck, but the backups as well.
Yep, completely agree.
In Ealers We Trust says, I would like to see Comrie to play in the next game against arguably the worst team in the NHL. Turd Ferguson says nobody has more experience waiting for 2 weeks between games like Eric Comrie. What do you think of him getting the next start?
It's going to depend on Hellebuck's health. If he's still experiencing some of those flu-like symptoms that he had earlier in the week, then yeah, absolutely sit, let Comrie get in there for another game. Like Turd says, nobody has more experience waiting for 2 weeks between games like Eric Comrie, so he knew he was going to come in yesterday ready to go. And yeah, if there's even just a tiny bit of Connor Hellebuck that isn't feeling well, I'm more than fine having Comrie play that game.
Pretty impressive that it's come out that he was dealing with that flu that made Morrissey miss the finals with early in that tournament when he allowed, what was it, 2 goals a game on average
Yep.
at the Four Nations. And I want to kind of use that to parlay over to Fat Tony 202's point over on Twitch, who says the Four Nations went about perfect for Hellebuck. He didn't need to play all 4 games, which is something we were all discussing going in. As great as it was that Connor Hellebuck was going to be the guy, it was going to add to that workload. He got that night off, and it wasn't that regular grind of a schedule. And then when you look at it, he played 3 games in, a week and a half? That's more than fine as far as managing a workload. And he also points out that the workloads weren't high, and he played well. And when you start looking at that, and that's a conversation I want to start having with myself more too as well, because I know I've been someone that's really pushed on wanting Hellebuck to play less games to have him ready for the playoffs. And Choices TK over on Twitch as well had sent a message earlier in the day talking about that debate. And I think we focus too much on the games played and not that workload within a game. Almost like when you're talking about pitchers in baseball and whatnot, is that game stressful on him? Is he having to work hard? And given how top end defensively the United States team was throughout that tournament, I don't think he really did. Outside maybe maybe the first game in Canada, even that would be a stretch because there wasn't a lot of the low to high or the seam plays. There was just like a lot of net front shots, which we know if he's able to square up, he's going to get to. And I do think if that was a concern, the way the Four Nations played out, like Tony had mentioned, really did play out well across all those boxes. And I think it should, I know because of the playoffs, right, there's the narrative that he can't play in big games. I think the tournament, despite losing in the gold medal game to Team Canada in overtime, should put to bed some of those concerns, seeing him among the best of the best and going into that final games. He was probably on the short list for MVP. I think that tournament went really well for Connor Hellebuck, and I think that's going to mean good things for the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, all things considered, outside of winning the gold medal, I don't think you could have scripted it much better for Connor Hellebuck. He came away with, not any major injury that's going to keep him out long term. For the Jets, it's maybe a little bit better that he comes back with a chip on his shoulder, wanting to still further prove something, not getting the win and the gold medal there. And yeah, he looked great. And I'm glad that you kind of highlighted the fact that it was only 3 games that he ended up playing in that stretch. And he's playing it behind, the best defensive team that he possibly could be with with the way the groupings were done. So there wasn't a lot of seam passes, like you said. They weren't having him dive across the ice and look like Andre Pavlik. It was kind of tidy work for Hellebuck, and will go, I think, a long way in solidifying, the confidence that he probably already has in himself. But on top of that, I do like the idea of, both Hellebuck and Kyle Connor coming back to the Jets with a chip on their shoulder, something extra to prove. to go out there and make the playoffs, a scary place for opposing teams.
On the Four Nations, Hellbuck talk. Let's wrap it up here, but let's stay on the Four Nations since we're here, and we'll get into Morrissey and, like you brought up, Kyle Connor. Hellbuck was asked today about his performance with an elite USA team, giving him the extra confidence heading into a Jets playoff push. And Hellbuck's response was, absolutely. And that's the best part about it, is that the game didn't feel all that different from our system here. We've been really good here in Winnipeg. And for him to kind of see some parallels in the system, just with elevated talent levels, was an interesting takeaway in the fact that Hellebuck is now trying to take some lessons from that tournament and apply them here in Winnipeg. Clearly sounds like a confident guy. Let's move towards the other two, though, as well. How'd you feel? Let's start with Kyle Connor. How'd you feel about Kyle Connor's Four Nations? And are you hoping that scratch on the final game sends a bit of a message and gives us another great version of Kyle Connor?
So, I'm sure a lot of our listeners and stuff know because they're the smartest, best looking listeners, that are out there. But Kyle Connor historically has always been a player that thrives after any type of perceived snub. Being left off of the World Junior roster the first year around, getting absolutely just robbed of the Hobby Baker. Both of those things sparked historically good runs out of Kyle Connor. Every time somebody tells him he can't do something, shouldn't do something, isn't good enough to do something, he, he's the Michael Jordan meme. He takes that personally, and then goes out there and puts it together. So, you know what? I'm a little bit happy at the way that things went for those guys, even though personally that's not the way they obviously want that tournament to go. I honestly see it as a net positive that, it kind of went in a bad way for them, especially Kyle Connor. But again, he's coming back healthy. He didn't pick up any injuries while he was over there. And if the worst thing he did pick up is a chip on his shoulder that he's going to apply to just terrorizing defenses for the Jets, I'm with you. I'm happy there.
Yeah, so I see Tony, and he's correct. Me and Tony had a bit of a debate when it came out that Kyle Connor was getting scratched. I was actually more than fine with it and fine with the U.S. team decision makers for it because, to put it bluntly, I didn't think Kyle Connor had a strong tournament at all. Didn't get much time on that Eichel line, which was disappointing. As if you've listened to the show, I was excited as all hell to see what that duel would look like. We got about 6.5 minutes until Kyle Connor made his way down to the fourth line. And then by the end of the tournament, he was the extra forward. And I do see the other side of the argument. And Tony's argument was that in a win or go home game, you want that elite guy that could put the puck in the back of the net and might make the difference. And I do think that's a strong argument. I just kind of understood where Sullivan was coming from based on what I saw from Kyle Connor. Is like I wouldn't have had trust in a small tournament.
Yep.
One of my bigger takeaways from this tournament, and again, it's only 3 or 4 games, so it's hard to make sweeping conclusions, and we'd be silly to, is it was our first time seeing best on best in like a decade, right? And my big takeaway is just how elite defensively that version of the sport is. That I felt like a lot of those one-way players who are elite offensive guys, like a Kyle Connor, like an Adam Fox. There was another guy I had in mind yesterday when I was getting ready for the show. The guys that kind of need that time and space to be creative. At the most elite level, there just wasn't that time and space. And I think it really threw a guy like Kyle Connor off. I was hoping he would kind of have a similar vibe as a Jake Gensel ended up doing, who I thought had a really strong tournament with US. And I do think that adjustment just didn't come for him. I imagine he's still going to be at the Olympics next year, and he's going to have a more than enough chance to kind of dispel that notion. I mean, at the end of the day, it's very easy to, I think, go back, especially if you believed it before the game, to criticize the Team USA coach not having the US's best goal scorer in the game. I really did see both sides of that one, and I do hope that it's a good thing for Winnipeg because these are the most competitive people on the planet. I don't think that someone like that is going to oh, my audio just went really low apparently. I don't think someone like that's going to wilter over getting scratched and piss and moan the rest of the year. I think he's going to want to make a statement. So I do think that is good for the Winnipeg Jets, arguably.
Yep.
Um, Josh Morrissey, that's the last person that was representing Winnipeg. How'd you feel about Morrissey's game?
Yeah, overall I think it was fine. We saw kind of just the way that he'd been playing for the Jets all the way through. Disappointing, of course, that he didn't get to play in the final with that real nasty bug that was going around. But again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. I'm just happy he came back without any major injuries. And that he'll be suiting up for the Jets going forward. Yeah, I thought he was fine. I thought he had been playing the way he'd been kind of constantly playing. How did you feel about his future line mate in Colton Parayko?
um, to just touch on the time and spacing, and I do think this is a fair point as well. Even McDavid has all kinds of trouble creating space. This tournament might have been a nightmare for Nick Ehlers. McDavid, before he scores that final game, I thought was horrible in that final game. So it was one of those ones where there was just no time and space in that tournament. And I think you saw which type of player was kind of impacted by that. As for Morrissey, I thought he really did shine well. I thought it was pretty sweet that he got the big promotion and he was the guy when Cal McCarr goes down. I also think it told us, or it should have told Hockey Canada for the Olympics, Bouchard should probably be on that team. He probably should have been this time. But
Yep.
if you lose a Kale McCarr, you're going to need to replace that guy. But yeah, I thought Josh Morrissey showed well. Obviously, very disappointing that he couldn't play in that final. I was hoping for a big night for him, hoping for the flu game. But I think it did nothing but wonders as far as Josh Morrissey's sights in the NHL. And I think Tony nails this because you asked about his future partner, Colton Parayko. I'm finding the narrative right now about his tournament interesting because I'm seeing both sides. Like when I was watching Colton Parayko this week, I saw the good that would excite people, but I also saw a lot of the bad. And I thought when Josh Morrissey was missing, it showed a lot more of that bad. Like I think Josh Morrissey really stabilized Colton Parayko in this tournament. In fact, Tony says that no one, not a soul, missed Morrissey as much as Parayko. They went from that second pair doing really well throughout the tournament to Parayko and Sanheim were both unplayable in that final.
Yep.
So what I kind of saw from Colin Parayko was I saw the size. Obviously, he's physical and he could use that size. He's also still got some juice as far as carrying the puck up the other way. Though a lot of the times what I didn't like about it, it was great to see him transition, but it felt like a lot of his transitions didn't create anything. That ended up being like an empty calorie rush. But there's value in those aspects. At times defensively, he reminded me a little of Tyler Myers at this stage, which is never a fun comp to be making when I've never been a Myers trustworthy guy defensively.
Yeah.
But I do think he looked real strong beside Josh Morrissey, mostly because Josh Morrissey was helping stabilize him. So I'm intrigued by it, but I do have more longer term concerns that I did going in, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. It's night and day how he looked with Morrissey and looked without, which isn't really something you want when we have that currently on the second pairing with Neil Pionk and Dylan Sandberg.
Mm-hmm. Though another takeaway, we've been so excited about the idea of Morrissey and Sandberg being our top two left-handed D, which is exciting. We should be excited about that. Good God, seeing Thomas Harley on that stage and realizing Dallas has him and Miro at this level was like a little slap in the face.
A little
Thomas Harley
frustrating.
he really impressed me when he stepped in. Zooch 40 says Jacob Slavin finally showed a lot of people why some of us have been so high on him for years. And I agree. I think he's the one getting a lot of the bump in narrative. He was a vacuum in the net front. And I think if you look at Jacob Slavin, there's reason to be excited about Dylan Sandberg's trajectory. Don't know if he'll ever get fully to Jacob Slavin level, but he's a very comparable player. And what we've seen in that growth, we might just have a light version of Slavin here in Winnipeg with Dylan Sandberg. And I think that's exciting after what you're hearing about and how much he's being raved about. Greg Wisniewski had put out an article right after the game looking at some of the locks, the maybes, and the on the bubbles for the Team USA moving forward. They had Pionk on there, and I had to let him know he's got the wrong Jets defenseman. It is Dylan Sandberg that could play defensive hockey at that level.
Yes, sir. How do you feel about Fat Tony 202's hot take on Slavin? That he was in last ditch effort far too much of the tournament. It mostly worked out, but it was a ton of close calls.
There was a lot of plays like there's one in Canada, the Canada game, late in the third. I want to say halfway through the third, maybe, where he does have to overextend and he just gets his stick on it. So I could see why Fat Tony would come away with that. And but the other side of it is I just saw him do it so often in that tournament that it's hard for me to criticize it. Like he defended just so well, nothing was created, even if it didn't look pretty all the time. And at the end of the day, the result was kind of what mattered, right?
Yep, absolutely.
I'll say this. I will never listen to anyone telling me Adam Fox is better than Josh Morrissey ever again. That's my big Jets takeaway coming out. I will never listen to anyone saying Adam Fox is a better defenseman than Josh Morrissey.
Wouldn't take it right now, even?
Not right now. Good God, no.
What do you think, chat? Who would you rather have, Josh Morrissey or Adam Fox?
Josh Morrissey for sure. Frosty Winnipeg goes. Actually, I want to take the Four Nations one spot before we get into some trades, but I do want to dive into Frosty's take there. So let's join everything we've been talking about. We started with the game against St. Louis. It was a sloppy game, and I had kind of said I thought Comrie was solid, and I would blame two individuals for a lot of what happened against him as far as the goals against go. We're talking about Four Nations and how Connor Hellebuck showed very well in front of us what he deemed a similar system with just higher end defensive, right? Yep. So I'm just setting the table here for what Choices TK had to say first in the Twitch chat as the show got started. And I want to bring that into a conversation about the Jets getting into the trade deadline. So Choices had said the defensive weaknesses of this team were on display last night. You lose one piece in Josh Morrissey and it goes to pieces. Pionk and Stanley are big risks in the playoffs where one mistake is often the difference between winning a series. Not a Picasso, but take the points and move on. And that's where I kind of want to take this. I remember early in the year, I was pushing very hard on maybe we've gotten it wrong and the Jets should chase defensive upgrades and focus on building their team around Morrissey and Connor Hellebuck and making their life easier because they're the best players on the Winnipeg Jets. And then as the season's gone on, we've kind of been going both ways with it. And in an ideal world, you'd like both. After that tournament, I think I'm harder into the defensive side and seeing Hellebuck behind that, both because, like Choices points out, if you lose one guy, it throws the whole thing into a loop, and I'd like to shore that up a bit. But the other side of it, and if you follow me on Twitter, you saw it today. There's obviously a lot of talk about Logan Stanley today after that first goal yesterday, where he bobbles the puck at the blue line. He's tied up with Robert Thomas, decides to try and run Buchnevich, I think it was, that made that pass. And Robert Thomas goes the other way on a 2-on-1, completely gone. Kyle Connor has a horrible change, and I don't want to write that part off. But if you're a capable NHL defenseman, you just made 3 mistakes in a row against the best player on the other team. That should be known going in that Robert Thomas is that guy. And it cost the Winnipeg Jets a goal. I thought he recovered decently towards the end of the game. But the thing is, and we're going to talk about Pionk as well, he has that big implosion. It's unfortunate the stick breaks at the blue line. But then without a stick, and I've kind of always said this, when Neil Pionk has to think, Neil Pionk gets in trouble. It's when he could kind of just do as his instincts want him to do, that his game's pretty fine. But he goes into just absolute implosion mode, takes 2 penalties, 4-minute power play for St. Louis with just over 4 minutes left. And you just can't have situations like that where the second goal, the wraparound goal, Neil Pionk gets caught in between decisions again on who he's supposed to get to, which frees up Robert Thomas for the wraparound. So what I'd kind of said on Twitter is that, for one, we have to move on from this experiment. I'm seeing John Shannon do pieces that, oh, the Jets are right, and Logan Stanley is going to be a big piece of the playoff picture. And we just can't keep feeding that narrative. The Winnipeg Jets have to move on from Logan Stanley. And here's why. For one, he doesn't make decisions quick enough. He doesn't move the puck quick enough unless he's got space. When he's physical, it's normally taking him out of position, which other teams will want him to do. he just can't think and play fast enough at this level to be someone you're going to rely on in the playoffs. Um, Typically speaking, and I've said this before on this show, teams can win cups with a bad number 6 defenseman. The problem is the Winnipeg Jets have 2 defensemen on 2 separate pairs that can and will self implode when the games get tougher, when there's pre scouts, when there's line matchups, when more strategy and more identification on a single team is going on, and rather than a one off in the middle of February. If I'm a team pre scout in the Winnipeg Jets now, and I'm looking at this team, and this team's a juggernaut right now, I'm looking to find those weaknesses so I can expose them. And very clearly right now, if I'm a team scout in the Winnipeg Jets, it's pressure Neil Pionk and it's pressure Logan Stanley. Going into a playoff race, you just can't have that level of downside risk. Last year, he played 3 games in the playoffs where this big physical defenseman is supposed to show up. He had the worst shot attempts differential on the team in those 3 games. He had the second worst expected goals percentage, only behind Neil Pionk, who in his last 2 playoff series has been outscored 14-6 with putrid metrics. One of them is going to be on this team. Neil Pionk will be in this lineup come playoffs. You cannot marry yourself to Logan Stanley being in with that scenario. You can't have both. You have to make an honest decision. You have to wake up and smell the coffee. And that's where my big problem is right now is I don't even believe with a single D ad that he'd be removed. It's become clear he's the number 5 defenseman in Scott Arniel's playbook. And if this team is showing that they can be serious, they have to stop and wake up and smell the coffee on this one.
So I agree with you. I don't think Scott Arniel agrees with us, unfortunately, just for the fact that when you look at, like, last night's a perfect example. Where did Logan Stanley play yesterday? With Dylan DeMello?
Yeah, with Dylan DeMello, yeah.
At 5-on-5, who was the second highest played player yesterday?
I'm going to guess Logan Stanley.
Logan Stanley. Overall minutes, who was the third highest played player yesterday? Logan Stanley. With only 1 injury, he is arguably either on your top pair or on your 1B pairing. He is not coming out of the lineup with 1 ad. It would honestly take 2 large named ads, one of them being on his specific handed side, for him to get pushed out of the lineup. I think we kind of have, Zuch says it in the chat. John Shannon's not wrong. He's going to be a big piece in the playoffs because he's going to play. He is locked into that spot unless Chevy goes out and finds a left-handed defenseman for that side, because that was the better deal that they could find, and something, would have to get moved around at that point. But I honestly don't see Logan Stanley coming out barring injury. Arniel has told us all year long he wants the size. Whether that is being utilized properly, whether it is effective, whether the results line up to it or not, Arniel has told us he likes that size. They want that size in the lineup, and yeah, it's frustrating. It's the results just aren't there, period. And I don't know how to argue it anymore without sounding like a broken record or sounding like a hater. I don't know if people have noticed, but we've made a concerted effort really to not even talk that much about Logan Stanley on the show recently, unless, of course, he's directly responsible for a goal, right? Unless there's something glaring that you have to talk about, because there's no point in talking about the 4 to 5 times that he misidentifies the threat of the play, the 4 to 5 times that he pinches where he should. There's no point, because it's the same thing every game, and those things don't matter to the coaching staff. They're going to keep playing him, whether like I said, it's injury. That's the only way he's coming out, or if he gets traded himself, like Fat Tony says, Chevy's likely has to trade him. Those are the only ways that you're going to not see Logan Stanley play. And for a team that is, it's a first place team, like we've talked about, for a team with deep playoff aspirations, it's real frustrating to look at that hole and go, man, what would we be even more so with, without those 18 minutes yesterday of closing your eyes and holding on for dear life.
Yeah, and that's not even to say that they necessarily have an improvement in house. I gotta say, I didn't like my boy Hainela's game at all last night. Unfortunately, that him and Miller just seemed off together, and I put a lot of it on Villy. I
Yeah.
mean, he hasn't played in a month, and
Yeah.
we've beaten that one down. He's not gonna be a Jet in 2 weeks, so
No.
it doesn't matter to me anymore. I'm not gonna fight the good fight. They've blown that asset at this point,
Yep.
but I tend to agree. The only way we don't see him is if the GM does what a GM should do and make sure that you take away the toys. But in my opinion, Stanley's one of the GM's toys at this point. I mean, he's the only constant that's seen this entire experiment through.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a Chevy thing, if it's a just he's great in the room, right? We've seen it time and time again, in locker rooms, not in Winnipeg, just all over the entire NHL, right? Guys stay in lineups because they're good, quote unquote, in the room. They're, the coaches like what they do, they like how they work. The, guys around them like them. It's one of those things that it's all of the intangibles that unfortunately aren't really leading up to a lot of extra wins that's keeping him in there. So it's it's frustrating being on the outside of it because, we try to look at things as objectively as we can, right? We've got stats to look at, we've got the game tape itself, right? We've got the eye test to kind of go off of it, and both don't point to Logan Stanley being a positive on the ice. So the only thing that's left is off the ice. They must view him in some way, shape, or form as being a positive off of it because yeah, I don't know, man. I just don't know.
Yeah. DL14 says, is he being showcased for a trade? And I've let myself believe that for like 3 or 4 years now. I'm not going to make the same mistake. I genuinely think this organization is the only organization that believes in him at this level at this point.
Yeah.
Um, in Oilers we trust, the Jets have arguably the best coaching staff this year. What gives, and they do. That's not to say that because of this decision, they're bad coaches or anything. At the end of the day, all coaches, all people, myself included, have blind spots and biases we prefer. And we're just kind of here to talk about them because there is a lot their coaching staff is doing right, but they have to figure this one out before the games matter because this is the type of thing that could blow up this entire year for you when you have two guys that can, and I promise will, implode when games matter. And the tightness matters, the checking matters, the reading the game matters, the speed, the intensity, everything ramps up. Every little decision matters, and this is one they have to get right moving forward.
Yeah, at a time when every mistake is amplified, you can't afford to be giving so many opportunities for mistakes. I guess the only bit of, solace or silver lining I can try to find is that, a lot of times in the playoffs the bench gets short. A lot of times, that third pairing doesn't see a whole lot of ice time um, the further we get into the playoffs, and we may just have to bank on a really good top four that can play 30 minutes each pairing, and Stanley can do a little bit of mop up here and there and try to limit the damage.
So going back, so we're heading into it. March 7th, the Friday, is going to be the trade deadline. I believe me and you are going to go live that day. We'll try and get some guests on and have a time. I believe that's the plan
Hell yeah.
for our audience here. And people want to talk trades, and the Winnipeg Jets continue to earn help from their GM. This is a big year. I talked about it the last show before leaving. This feels like the highest stakes year for the Winnipeg Jets and Kevin Cheveldayoff. So let's dive into some of the links we've seen, some of the reports we've seen, some of the players we've seen. Let's start with Frosty Winnipeg's comment from earlier I mentioned I want to get back to. Frosty, while we were talking about Parayko, had said, Buchnevich, ? Parayko, ? How about getting Thomas, ? So we were kind of getting some rumors right as we had gone into the Four Nations break that St. Louis is looking to really shake up what's been going on there. We've seen Doug Armstrong make some comments publicly as well, not happy with that core. We've seen rumors that Shen is looking to be offloaded. But it's come out that Buchnevich and Kyrou could also be had. If you're familiar with me, I've long been a believer that Pavel Buchnevich would be the type of winger that would really benefit this team now and moving forward. And if you're able to get your way into a situation like that, I'm a big fan. Big fan of Pavel Buchnevich. Robert Thomas would be the dream. Obviously, we saw it on full display last night. That is the one name that's been at least quote unquote ruled untouchable in the media. If you can get a center like that for the rest of his prime that he signed for, Frosty, I'll start chiseling the Kevin Cheveldayoff statue, making that kind of impact ad. That one does seem a little bit tougher to get to. Um, like I said, I'm somewhere in the middle on the Parayko stuff. I think it could work in the short term, and that's all that would matter if it did. And this team went on a bit of a run and got through some of their past problems. But I do have that shorter, medium term risk that I'm kind of worried about with where his game's trending. Kyrie's an interesting one. Again, it's a prime age scorer. I don't think he's the type they're looking for, but talk about a guy that would be in Ehlers insurance should he be walking this summer, which I believe will be coming. He's younger, dynamic. You would have to rejig this lineup right now to make him work. I think you would have to go to the Ehlers, Lowry, Kyrou type thing with Nino, Perfetti, Vlad type of setup. But that's something, again, I've preached and want to see more of Ehlers and Lowry together. So that would be cool with me. St. Louis is an interesting spot if you do want to find some term and some impact right now. What do you think of those names?
Kyrou, if you can find a way to make that trade work, would be the one I'd be the most interested in
Probably
terms
the
of
most easily attainable as far as no trade protection and stuff as well.
no trade protection, signed long term, only 26, plays center, can play right wing. I think that's easily the guy that would be the most appealing for me. Parayko, I've been open to taking the bet on him if we can get that to work, because like you said, in the short term, that's all I'm really caring about right now. You know, can he be that impact player alongside Josh Morrissey right now so that they can go out and win a cup? Little more worried after watching him play without Morrissey at Four Nations, so that gave me just a bit more pause there. And I've been with you on the Booch train. I think he would be a real nice fit, but I think it's going to be a little harder to make that trade work in the end. So if they're willing to move on Kyrou, if that's the way they're looking to go, that's something I would definitely take a look at. And they're wanting young defense, right? So hey Billy Hainala, how you doing, buddy? You want to take up a new life over in St. Louis, Missouri? Because that might be a good spot for him to try to go find some minutes. And obviously that wouldn't be the whole of the trade, but I'm just trying to find a spot for Billy as well, because I feel bad for the guy, and I still think there is hockey in him, right?
Fat Tony makes the comparison that Kyrou is Canadian Nick Ehlers, and I think that's something this fan base could get around, especially moving forward as well, right? All of a sudden, you
Totally
fix that
agree.
hole with a 4-year younger version. You're going to get some more prime years out of that. Let's move into some other names, because we've seen some very interesting and we'll leave this because I do think Gilbert makes a very important point here, and this is something I don't want to cloud my own judgment too much. Gilbert does say Parayko would be great. You're not playing against Team USA in the playoffs, and that is something to remember too, is that we won't be going up against rosters to that level, to that extent. So I think that's a great point from Gilbert over on YouTube. We've seen the Jets in the past week get linked in some interesting spots. Some spots I'm not too crazy about. Some other ones that are interesting. Let's go for the big one. Elliot Friedman suggests that if Carolina were to reflip Mikko Rantanen, he believes the Winnipeg Jets will be in the lengthy list of suitors lined up to try and get a crack at the rental version. He expects a Western Conference arms race between teams like Edmonton, Vegas, Winnipeg to unfold. What I don't get about this situation is why would I mean, everyone's talking about it, so clearly Carolina's considering it. I just don't understand why Carolina, who has a great opening in the Eastern Conference that just became even wider with the early Matt Tkachuk reports. It sounds like Matt Tkachuk is done for the year after Four Nations, which is going to be a blow to Florida. I don't understand why Carolina, in the spot they are in, would reflip Mikko Rantanen. Like, I almost feel like this is something kind of getting clickbaity as a headline. Like, there's no way Carolina's going to be able to trade him and get better in their spot. What do you think of all this Rantanen stuff, and would you like to see him as a Winnipeg Jet?
So The only way I could see it being the case where they are legitimately looking to try to flip him again is if he's told them, I want nothing to do with playing here. Right? That's the only thing to me that would say this is a serious thing. Uh, and that, they're actually looking to move him because, yeah, there's no way they're going to get the value back in that type of trade right now. So unless he is being absolutely obstinate off the ice and just saying, look, I don't want to play here. You need to move me. Um, you know, uh, do I want the Jets in on that? No, that's not the route because I don't think they're going to be able to make a trade where the value is going to be what we want to see for Rantanen. Um, yeah, the whole thing is just off to me. The whole situation feels off and wrong. I don't think they're going to end up moving him, to be honest, in the end. Like I said, unless it comes out that he is just demanding it, that he is going, I don't want to play here.
So Zooch40 says, unless it's her futures, Jets are out. And that's like the approach I would be somewhat interested in taking here.
Yep.
Fat Tony 202 does make an interesting point. I think he might be on the right lines actually with what Carolina is thinking now that he says this. They want an NHLer they could sign long term. Thus, it was always a Nekis replacement type move. And so here's where I think this is going, and I think Ben Howard just nailed it on YouTube as well. If this Rantanen thing was real, the only pathway I see to the Winnipeg Jets reasonably pulling this off is Nick Ehlers plus for Rantanen. So you're trading two UFAs for each other. We know Carolina has been long interested in Ehlers. That's been a rumor forever. And talk about a guy as far as filling out a Nekis replacement. Makes some sense, though a bit older than Nekis at this point. But Nekis had made it clear he was going to test UFA regardless of where he got traded, and that's why he didn't end up here, right? If you remember that, he was going to be testing UFA. So here's where I kind of get into a holdup. I love the idea of Winnipeg getting bold and bringing in a big name like that. Like Mikko Rantanen would be a headline-shaking addition in this market. Even more so if they found a way to re-sign him.
Yeah.
But here's where I have some pause. I'm not convinced he's significantly, if that much better than Nick Ehlers. So you're going to be giving up more assets. You have probably bigger holes that you still need to get to. So what does this asset cost look like? And are you going to be able to fill some of those other holes? And like when I'm looking at this, I've started looking more at Mikko Rantanen. And over the last 3 years, man, him without Nate Mack is pretty eye-opening. And the Winnipeg Jets don't have that level of center to seamlessly put him with. The other aspect of it, Nick Ehlers is a big piece of that power play, and we know his support role, his puck movement, his skating on that PP has kind of helped open up some of the other options for guys. I'm not saying he's the most important part, but I do think his piece helps create a lot of what's been working well on the power play. I don't think Mikko can necessarily step in and do that kind of thing. So I almost think it's a shuffling of deck chairs that you end up spending a little bit more asset-wise, and you end up at a fairly similar spot.
Exactly. Yep. That's why it's not really one that I'm interested in. He played his best hockey playing alongside, Nate McKinnon and Gabe Landeskog, playing big minutes every single night. He's not going to do well playing the reduced amount of minutes that come with playing in that Nick Ehlers type of role. And looking at the power play specifically in Ehlers' role, we can look at the stretch where Ehlers was out and how that impacted both power play units to a point where, that was the driest portion of the season for them. So he maybe isn't, quote unquote, the best or the most important part of that power play, but man, he makes it work, and he makes it work to, he helps it work to that historic level that they've gotten to. And to take that skill set out and replace it with a completely different one means you're changing that entire power play landscape again. Or you're going to try to fit a square peg into a round hole. Neither one is really beneficial to you this late in the season when you're trying to make that long-term push. So yeah, I don't want to spend a bunch of extra assets to end up in a very similar spot with a player who may not fit as well in terms of style and production. So yeah, for me, I'm kind of out on Rantanen specifically, but yeah, I do like the idea that the Jets are being linked to the big name, big time players right now.
And in Ehlers We Trust says something. He says, imagine Mikko Rantanen and Ehlers on the same line. Now, if you can make that work, my tune changes on what this outlook looks like. I'm just trying to think from Carolina's
Yeah.
perspective how that would kind of make some sense.
Yeah.
Kim Sawchuk, nice to see you in the chat, says Rantanen has been playing pretty dejected hockey since the trade. Keep Ehlers, he's playing with spark and spit, and that's something I would agree with based on what I've seen there. And as always, we like to play a little devil's advocate and share other perspectives. Tony wants to play devil's advocate on this one, says Mikko would completely shut the door on Pionk. If Mikko is willing to sign, I think it changes that Ehlers convo.
Yeah.
I just don't know that going in, and being in this market, I can't expect that situation to play out that well.
Yeah.
That is a positive if they can get him signed and then they're not spending that Peon contract. That is a positive. It just, we don't know if he would sign here. And it also says Mikko would also take Velarde's spot on the top line, which would be interesting if we still had Ehlers to play with Velarde, which is the pair I want to see. So it all comes back to me is I don't want to see Ehlers plus futures for Rento Mikko and you end up similar to where you're at. That's kind of like where my head's at right now.
Yep, I'm with you on that one.
If you can get Mikko another pathway, I'm in. Like I'm in. I'm just trying to figure out what Carolina would try and want. And that's the only thing that seems to make sense to me.
It is, yeah. That's the only one that they'd really, I think, would open the discussions around. But it would need to come with a whole lot of assurances. They need to talk to his agent ahead of time, see if they can work out the deal, some type of sign-in. Like there'd be, yeah. It's not a route that I'd like the Jets to go down. I think we can add to the roster without removing Nick Ehlers, in an impactful way. Still, that'll get them where they need to go for the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Tony says Velarde would be the other guy, and you're not going there for a rental.
No.
I mean, they did ask for Perfetti in the Neckett stuff. Maybe there's something there, but let's go. Let's go to another target. Actually, Frosty's cooking today. Frosty's feeling the trades today. Frosty brings up someone we saw, and this one's really interesting to me. Seth Jones has asked out of Chicago, and he's willing to expand his list to contenders. I'll start with that before getting into my thoughts. Mikey, Seth Jones as an option, as Frosty Winnipeg points out here.
That's an interesting one. You're going to have to find either a third team to hop into this or paying them to hold a lot of money back in retention, because that's not a contract I'm real excited about jumping into. 9.5 for another 5 years. So that's
I'll pull him up here.
He's signed till 29-30.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, like I said, you're going to have to involve a third team in my assumption here to make this work dollars wise. Hockey wise, I'm willing to take a look at that. I feel like he fits what they would kind of want in that spot. You've got him signed for 5 more years. If you can get a third team involved to bring that cap hit down, you can, squeeze out the last 3-4-ish years, maybe, of his prime and get out of it towards the end of it there. So it's an interesting discussion, not my first choice for sure. And it would be pricey because I'm going to want a third team involved to eat some cap.
As with everything, especially with trades, every little detail is going to matter here. I'll say this. I'm more intrigued by the Seth Jones pathway than I would have been maybe in the summer. The fact that he's like, when he had first gone to Chicago, there was kind of some like immaturity there. At least it sounded like it. Like he was trying to go to this one spot where he could be the captain. He wanted to be the face, and things haven't gone there. And now he's talking about wanting to win at this point of his career. And I think that's an important reason why. At 9.5 mil, I would not want to take on the full contract like you're saying, despite the fact that the Jets could reasonably fit that in. Now, the Winnipeg Jets are a contender, and I don't think that's can be disputed. The Winnipeg Jets, if you also look at contenders, are probably one of a few teams that could fit money a bit easier for Chicago when looking at this bigger picture. Chicago's gonna have to eat money to make this work. There's no way. I shouldn't say no way. Stupid stuff happens in the league all the time.
We've seen a lot of stupid ones, yeah.
I just have a lot of trouble seeing them be able to get out of all that money with a no move clause, with a limited market, without eating money. So if you can get that down, like if you can get them to eat $2 million and you get to that 7.5 range or 2.5 mil per year
Yeah.
and get to that $7 million range, you have my attention. Now, asking a team to eat $2.5 million for the next 4 or 5 years, that's a big financial cost. It's going to cost a little bit as far as assets with that involved. But if you can get Seth Jones in here at $7 million, a guy that I think would really thrive. Again, I think Dylan Sandberg's emergence has really changed my perspective on some of the D potential targets
Yep.
because I think Dylan Sandberg could bring out the best out of a guy like Seth Jones. Whereas I wasn't as convinced of that coming into the year. Where, and it goes back to what Tony had to say about Miko. If you get Seth Jones in here at 4 years remaining after this, 4.5 years total at 7, all of a sudden you're better off defensively. You're getting a better player, and you're not giving Pionk the 6.5, 7 million that he's going to get over a longer term.
Yep.
So you're upgrading the team in the now and into the future. But I think that's a really complicated trade in season to get done.
Yeah, you've got to get them. Like I said, 7 is the number I'm comfortable at. I'll agree with Tony and whoever else suggested that in the chat. There, 7 is definitely the spot where I go, okay, we can make this work. Like you pointed out, the Dylan Sandberg of it all really changes that ability. It gives you that extra player there on a cost certain deal that you're more than happy with. And he can play alongside a Seth Jones on a pair that is going to just give fits to the other team. So it's, yeah, if you can get that number at 7, whether that's Chicago eating it for the next 4 seasons after this one or another team splitting it with them, you know what I mean? You can try to find something like that. That's the way I would try to work it out with Seth Jones, because it's just, I can't do that full 9.5 for the 4.5 going forward. It's just, that's going to be a little hard on me still.
Oh, 100%. Looking at the chat, some pros towards it. Kim Sawchuk says Winnipeg is a contender, and I'm surprised by the Arneal discussion. The Jets are first place in the division and conference and vying for the top spot in the league. Wake up. I don't think we're being all that hard on Scott Arneal. I mean, this is a guy that is going to be in the finalist for the Jack Adams.
Absolutely.
But there is aspects that he's going to have to get right for this team to do what we want to see them do in the playoffs. And that D conversation is a big part of it. Despite what is going on in the regular season, we've learned that from years past. I like a lot of what Scott has done, but that's an area he's really got to figure it out with Dean Chenoweth. That's not the guy to bet on. Ben Howard says 9.5 for 3 years from now isn't going to hurt that bad. I doubt any team retains for that long. Basement dwellers that would retain would plan to be playoff bound 3 years from now. So here's the thing with Chicago. I don't think I think that team's a long stretch away. They remind me of the Eichel Sabres, where yeah, they got the big talent in Bedard, but they just tore everything so far down around it that I think it's going to take a build up. The reverse side of that argument, because I see where Ben's coming from, especially with the salary involved, and it is going to be a part of this. Though we did see even Phoenix have to retain money on a similar length deal with OEL. So it's not unheard of. We've seen that happen in season, or that was at the draft. But the other side of it, if you're Chicago in 3 years and Seth Jones is now 33, 34, would you rather have that version of Seth Jones while you're competing or trying to take a step? Or would you rather go spend $7 million on someone that might be a bit better for that window? So I do think there is a real reason for them to really consider this. You kind of saw San Jose just execute this kind of plan in that regard, as far as eating money on guys like Carlson and Burns, clearing up the future books down the line so that when they're competing, their books are clean. I do think there is validity to Chicago eating money to get out of Jones early. I just don't know if they're going to light $10 million on fire. That's a real question I would have. So that's kind of where I'm at there.
Yep, totally agree. How do you feel about Choice's thought that it feels like Nate Schmidt $7+ million, a third pair defender in the last 2 years of the Seth Jones deal? You think he falls that hard off of a cliff where he ends up how we view Nate Schmidt at the end?
I have a little bit of trouble with the Nate Schmidt comp just because I think the talent level is at a much higher level than what Nate Schmidt was when we got him. Like Nate was already a third pairing defenseman at this point, whereas Seth Jones is still a quality like 3-4. So I wouldn't be as worried about that cliff coming that quick.
Yep.
And like I said, I think Dylan Sandberg just elevates his partner so much that you might see even some more juice out of Jones than what you're getting on a depleted Chicago team right now. I'm intrigued by the concept.
And there's a lot to say about the change of scenery, right? We've seen that so many times in sports over the years. A guy getting a fresh start in a new place, a place where he doesn't have to come in and be the guy. All the pressure isn't on his shoulders. He can come in, just play hockey. There's a lot that can be said for what that change brings. So yeah, it's a reclamation project that I'd be fine with the Jets taking a shot on, as long as the numbers work. That's always the caveat.
And the Winnipeg Jets do have to be cognizant on some of the future money. They are in a great spot when it comes to future money and what is available, but they do have some big raises coming in Kyle Connor, Gabe Velarde, potentially Nick Ehlers, though I don't think that's coming, and Cole Perfetti. Dylan Sandberg's going to get a raise. Like that stuff is to be cognizant about as well. But I do think in this moment, Jones does offer a really, really interesting possibility. Now, I also have my doubts he waves to come to Canada, so we might have just talked about this for nothing.
Yep.
But it is an interesting one. To wrap up the Seth Jones talk here, Gilbert says, can't Jones play with Morrissey and DeMello go to the third pair? I mean, in theory, he could.
Yep.
I just do not want to go into the playoffs with Neil Pionk in my top four. And I'd rather Dylan DeMello with Morrissey, Seth Jones, and Sandberg than to be trusting Pionk in that spot.
Totally agree. Although I can't remember who mentioned it on the YouTube chat, but that would mean a Stanley Pionk third pairing, and that's some nightmare fuel.
Hey, third pair, it's whatever. You want the way you want to look at NHL rosters and going into the playoffs, the top matters way more. They're going to be playing way more minutes, and you hope they figure out the rest.
Yep, totally agree.
You hope they figure out the rest. Ben says, does anyone think Friedman saying he'd like to go to a contender is a subtle hint that he might go to Winnipeg? I didn't read into it that way, but when you start looking at some of the math and Jones even talking about how he knows his contract's going to be hard to get to a contender, that's a very interesting insight, Ben. That's actually, you've piqued my interest in that one.
I've always been a very big proponent of winning fixes everything. You can be the most undesirable destination, but if you are consistently winning, if you are looked at as a threat to win a Stanley Cup, players will come and wave and play for you. They may not sign long term. You may not be signing, free agents, the high end free agents long term with the big overpayments. But when it comes trade deadline time, especially for rentals, I feel like you've got more of a shot of grabbing those guys when you are a consistent winner. So it's possible.
And Fat Tony points out a great point, and I'm pulling it up now on Puckpedia. One last bow on Seth Jones, and we're going to move on to one last target that we've been linked to and I want to avoid, and then we'll move on with our Sunday nights here. This is interesting. Fat Tony points out over on Twitch that Jones's cash goes down significantly as this deal goes on, and there's value in that in this market right now, obviously. But also, it would mean the retained money would be less dollars out of the ownership group. After this season, Seth Jones' regular salary goes from $8 million, which is already less than his cap hit, down to $7.5 million for the last 3 years. Where I'd be intrigued about Winnipeg is 5 of that 7.5 is coming from signing bonuses, and we know this org stayed away from bonuses. But that is another thing to consider when we're talking about this.
Yep, absolutely. That's we know that's something that plays into what the Jets look at if we look at what their past performance in the trades and things are. So yeah, there's a lot to like with Jones here. It's the type of, even if it's not specifically him, this is the type of guy I feel like the Jets are looking at, that they will be targeting, where it's a little more creative. You have to be a little bit more, malleable with it, as opposed to just a straight up rental for a pick. I want to just touch on something you said real quick too. Seth Jones kind of mentioned that he knows that his contract is going to be one that's difficult to trade to a contender. the Winnipeg Jets are one of those few contenders that have cap flexibility right now and going forward with the cap increasing, and the way that the current contracts are coming up. They are one of those very few teams that can make a trade work even with very minimal retention. So it's
Hmm.
it's a real hot spot. It's something to definitely keep an eye on because yeah, this is the type of situation I think the Jets are looking for.
And we're gonna end it with their. Oh no, we got two things to talk about still. One name that they've been linked to as one of the two favorites I've seen is Scott Lawton. I've been under the impression that the Leafs are the favorites there because we've seen the Leafs offer leak, and that's normally a way that teams try and get others to up their offer.
Yep.
I would not like to see Scott Lawton be the ad. Let's avoid that one. Rahul, I see you joined into the show. Thoughts on Jordan Kyrou? You're going to have to rewind 10, 15, 20 minutes earlier because we got into Jordan Kyrou, and I think you'll enjoy that conversation based on what I think your thoughts are on him. Let's go out talking about Vlad Domestikov. We've been saving that for the end. Signed 2 more years in Winnipeg, $3 million per year. What were your thoughts with the Vladdy deal yesterday?
Not my favorite signing, to be honest. If we were going to have any in-season extensions, that's not the one that would have been first on my list. The Jets really like him. He is a guy that the coaching staff and the GM absolutely adore. He's kind of their Swiss Army knife. They plop him on any line. They plop him on the wing. They'll throw him at center. They trust him in pretty much every situation. Is he the offensive juggernaut that I would like playing on that second line? No. Is he even the grinding center I would like playing on that second line? No. I'd still rather Adam Lowry take that spot, something we haven't really talked about yet. I just wanted to say, I called that, by the way, Lowry coming back and everybody going back to their old spots.
You did.
Regardless of what the results were before. Just want to say. So, it's an inexpensive deal, 3 million AAV for the next 2 years. It is what it is. It's not a deal I would have signed. I probably would have liked to have had that money go other places. I think you can find what he brings internally, or even out on the open market. But like I said, it's a guy they like, the guy they're familiar with, and they're gonna overpay a little bit for those things.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ways. I think when you get an in-season contract like this, we were kind of talking about going into the break. We expected some kind of contracts to get some certainty going into the deadline for Kevin Cheveldayoff, and we were looking at guys like Sandberg, Pionk, Velarde, obviously. And we did have a discussion before the break that of that core group of depth guys in Domestikov, Appleton, Iafallo, I expected them to be able to re-sign one, but I was hoping that if they were to commit to one of those guys, it would mean the other two walks. And at the time of that conversation, I had Iafallo, Domestikov, and then Appleton.
Yep.
Totally fine with the contract personally. I think Vlad's been a pretty nice find for the Winnipeg Jets, both personally in the room. From what I've heard, he's like the favorite player of everybody in that dressing room, and he's really embraced Winnipeg. And I do think there is value to that, having people so outwardly about Winnipeg. But the big aspect is at $3 million, he's paid for what he is, and that's a bottom six forward. The term was only 2 years. I just hope it means that they don't invest in Iafallo and Appleton moving forward, because you can only spend so much money on the bottom of your roster. And the things you get out of it, you talked about the Swiss Army knife. You get a guy that plays all three positions, and like Gilbert says, 2 years, no risk. The money doesn't bother me. His spot in the lineup doesn't bother me. He's been a piece of this, so I'm totally fine with this one. You can't spend bigger money on some of those other bottom six guys moving forward.
Yeah.
I think that should be the one of those three now, as far as maintaining that flexibility to upgrade moving forward. And it's interesting too when Choices TK points this out on Twitch. Vlad signed, and Lambert's now playing wing on the Moose. Does that mean Ehlers is gone and with Lambert playing in the wing and kind of getting him ready there? And it's those type of interesting little insights that intrigue me on what this kind of means. On the signing of Vlad too, I do think it makes sense for the Jets in a position of strength going into the summer. I think it's very obvious it's going to continually be a 2C conversation in Winnipeg until they land one with
Yep.
term. But at least you go into the summer knowing you have options that can get you to the deadline, right? Like, as much as we don't see Vlad as a 2C, him, Lowry, and Vlad, Lowry, and Shifley as three centers have been more than fine of keeping this team afloat, and then you go look for upgrades elsewhere. So I do think the Vlad signing is a strong one. I just hope that they stop there when it comes to the depth players.
Yeah, to echo Al Camino over on YouTube, if it means Appleton is out the door, then you know what, totally okay with it. If you had the choice yourself, would you have signed Vlad or Iafallo?
I go back and forth all the time on those two. Vlad, since coming was a few weeks before the break, that line finally started clicking after being the worst line in the league for a while there, and Vlad looked healthier. So I do think there was a stretch there where Vlad wasn't playing at 100%, and we might have, in the moment, really railroaded him probably a little too hard.
Yeah.
I think he does offer more flexibility lineup-wise moving forward than Iafallo, but I do really like how Iafallo's fit into this system. That is a tough question for me right now. I get if you're looking at it from a management perspective, I think Vlad gives you more options, and that term is just so little that it shouldn't hurt you.
Even just the ability to play center.
Just that ability itself, right? It creates more flexibility. And you know he's a guy that's going to show up to the rink wanting to play his best, whether he's on the fourth line or the second. So I do see why that was the choice, and I do think it's a more than fair one.
Would you, if they offered Iafallo the same deal 2x3, would you be upset if that was signed, or how would you feel about that? With this money still on the books, like Nemestikov's deal is in. If they also came out, and said, "Yeah, we've signed Iafallo, same deal, 2x3," how would you feel?
Good question. I'm not sure I'd feel great.
Even with the cap going up?
Even with the cap going up, like next year, it's not that much. It's the year after.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this summer as a real big opportunity moment for the Winnipeg Jets when you have $40 million to spend, some key guys to get figured out, but you can actually use that money to go trade for some assets that are maybe, we know Chevy style, someone that's contract looks a little bit over water. He's willing to go get that to upgrade. And I just think by spending $3 million after $3 million after $3 million on depth guys, you really eat at some of those opportunities for higher end talent.
Yeah.
I think it has to be the one of the three, and I think they had to have made their decision. I don't think I go that route.
Right on. Sounds good.
Especially with the other thing with Iafallo, you do have guys like Chibrikov who's shown well. It's a shame he got injured. There's increasing hype that the org believes that they can get Dmitry Reshevsky over from the K. We'll see if that happens.
That'd be interesting.
I never know what to believe out of the Russian side of things.
Yeah.
But this is an org that is in a pretty good spot when it comes to wing depth. That I don't see Iafallo as a guy you need to rush to get that done. Let's see where some of these opportunities go. Now, if they link up back on July 1 and come back to each other, hey, more than fine, like they did with Vlad last time.
Yep, absolutely. We saw that specifically with Vlad. So, yeah, there's always a chance that he comes back and takes, a real big pay cut because he wants to be a part of the group. And yeah, if you get him on a super cheap deal, again, that's another player that you can bounce between lines whenever you need it.
And I missed this part. Vlad being a prick on the ice also isn't nothing from Fat Tony 202.
Totally agree.
We know that's starting to rub on Prick Fetty a little bit,
which I love.
Yeah, I like IFL the player. It's just I think when you start compounding more money at the bottom of your lineup, it really impacts what you could do at the top of the lineup. And they have guys like Connor, Velarde, Sandberg that are all going to get sizable raises that I don't want you to limit what you can do around them when you finally enter a time period where you're going to have flexibility. That's my big overarching thought. If they can make it work and IFL is back, I mean, that's a quality hockey player.
Yep.
Quality depth hockey player that you could trust out there to do his role. I just don't want to sacrifice bigger opportunities because you signed a guy for $3 million that's going to be on your fourth line unless injuries happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just think that's the wrong priority spot.
How do you feel? So just not to extend this out too much longer, but How do you feel about Vlad coming back into that second line center spot over Adam Lowry now that everybody is healthy? When we saw the like drastic change in play style with those wingers having Lowry between them, uh, how do you how do you square that? What are the coaches wanting or seeing? Do you think that uh, yeah, Vlad is seems to be locked into that 2C spot, barring a trade?
When Larry went down and Vlad got back into that spot, that line really did take off in a way that we haven't seen, especially in transition and creating off the rush. So I'm guessing Arniel's entire concept has been we're gonna go with this group that I've bought in from day one, and they're gonna like eventually get chemistry. It's eventually gonna work. It's been the talk with the first line,
Yep.
it's been the talk with the second line, and then before the break, we finally saw that second line producing. So I think it was very easy for a coach who had an idea in mind to go back to that original idea when that second line had provided a spark. Outside the goal last night, which was a great chip from Vlad, a great feed from Perfetti, a great shot from Ehlers, I didn't love their game. And I do think my whole thing, and we're running out of real estate real quick coming into the deadline, is that I felt January and February could have been used to really try some new things that would inform your deadline better. I still do want to see Nick Ehlers and Adam Lowry get a real stretch of hockey together because I do think it makes the Winnipeg Jets a deeper and tougher team to play against. But I also do understand in this moment, based on where the team was at right before the break, why he went back.
Makes sense. Yep. It feels more like we've been off for a while. We'll go to something that we're used to, that we know how this works. Everybody knows each other on these lines. And, hopefully we'll get to see a little bit of experimentation before the deadline hits.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. And what I'm hoping is that 4-game look of Lowry and Ehlers gives Arniel that thought when things like stagnate. Because we saw it through November through January, despite some struggles, he didn't really want to play with the lineup. One of my theories was with the team being so high in the standings, he didn't want to step on feet. And we've seen some of the reaction with the core and the coach in years past, especially Bones, right? I'm hoping because of the necessity of Lowry playing with Ehlers and how well they looked for those 4 games, that maybe there isn't that hesitation period from Arniel to go there as we move forward, because I do think that is an avenue that should be exhausted a little bit more.
Totally agree.
So, hey, I want to thank you to the chat for jumping in today, dealing with all of our tech problems, all that, sticking with us. It was real fun to get here and chat with you guys again. We'll be back tomorrow night after the game to break it all down. So thank you for being here. Mikey, it was great to talk with you again, buddy. And I hope everyone has a great week.
Right on, guys. You all know the drill. Tell 2 friends to tell 2 friends. Rate, review, and remember, it's the landing strip for your Winnipeg Jets post game.